Satoru Gojo is gone. Now, depending where you're reading between the manga and the anime, that can have different meanings, but besides the point, he is gone. And our question really should be, who, if anyone, can live up to his level? Or surpass it? I don't think you can surpass somebody that was limitless, but is there anyone who could at least take his place? There are some candidates, so let's go ahead and break them down to see who actually might be as strong as the strongest sorcerer in the world. I think to start with, you have to talk about Yuta because, Yuta being the main protagonist of JJK0 and having one of the strongest curse techniques. I mean, it's probably on par with, if not stronger, than cursed spirit manipulation. Yuta is definitely a character with a lot of potential, and that has always been a factor within the series. People talk about him that way. The sorcerers originally feared him because of the power behind Rika, let alone not realizing what his actual technique was. And even the fact that he specifically regained his curse technique and all of his abilities, restoring him to special grade after JJK0, is a significant event. And to be clear, Yuta's power is probably the second strongest in the series, as Copy, which is his ability, is giving him unlimitless abilities. I mean, he doesn't even have a limit on the number of curse techniques that he can store, because Rika essentially works as a permanent vault for that and doesn't allow it to tax his system too much. So in truth, he is probably the next big contender for Gojo's spot. But he's not the only one, and there's an important thing to note that while he can copy any number of techniques, he doesn't seem to be able to use them at the same time. So there is some limitations on that. And of course, he says even though his pool of cursed energy is larger than Gojo's, without the 6 eyes, he will run out of it first. Bearing that in mind, though, you have to keep in mind he is the only person on this list that can consciously make a domain expansion, because there are a few others who have access to the ability, but it doesn't work the same way. He's also a master swordsman, and, his cursed energy release ability is pretty fantastic. That brings us to our next person on the list, who is Hakari. Now, if you're anime only yet, you haven't met Hakari, but he is undoubtedly one of the strongest sorcerers in the world. It's difficult to say if he's on par with Yuta or not, because he comes off as so unlikable to so many of the other sorcerers. It's a bit like Todo. Nobody really wants to acknowledge how strong he is. But Hakari is an interesting example of how his technique puts him above anything else, even without as much training. And I'll be clear, hand-to-hand combat-wise, he's probably on par with Yuji. But his ability is Idle Death Gamble, which basically, very condensed, allows him to create a pachinko machine inside his domain expansion. If he gets anything good from the randomization, he gets a big power bonus, he gets unlimited cursed energy, and he's unlimited able to heal himself. That's pretty significant. Now, I'll point out those are not his only abilities. Like I said, he's pretty great at master combat. He's good at judging odds. There is a hint that even though his technique relies on gambling, he's somehow able to rig certain events in it, but we don't entirely understand how that works. And even beyond that, he has a pretty good grasp of tactics, even being able to relocate his domain while he and somebody else are inside of it. So he's very, very skillful with his cursed energy, his technique, and despite probably not being as skillful as Yuta, is exceedingly powerful. There's a reason why they are going to seek him out during culling games. And that brings us to the other two candidates. Now, these are technically candidates who were talked about by Gojo, but I do have to clarify they have not displayed the abilities that would put them on par with him, like Hakari and Yuta have. I would say the first one of these is Yuji, because we already know that, Gojo said that Yuji would have been on par with these two characters. Right now, though, even up to towards the end of JJK, he isn't. He's just not. He does not have anywhere close to a special grade ability. And because of that, he clearly does not qualify within just that banner alone. The idea of stating this was when Gojo thought that he would inherit Sukuna's technique because Sukuna is special grade, but Yuji never did, and he's unlikely to at this point. And with that in mind, unless he activates his hereditary technique, which a lot of people speculate he has, or for some reason he just gains Sukuna technique, he will never amount to this particular level. He will be great. He will always be grade 1, perhaps even that weird special grade 1 title that some people get, but he's not on par with Gojo or any of the 4 special grades. which leaves us with Megami. Now, that probably sounds odd because, again, this is a little bit like Yuji in that Gojo mentions it more offhandedly, saying that Megami could keep up with Yuji, and because he thought Yuji could reach his level, Megami should be able to as well. I'll point out that the conditions for him doing this more than likely would have rested on the fact of when Gojo has that conversation with him in their flashback, and he says, well, one member of the Zenin clan beat one member of the Gojo clan, and you can do that too. The problem is, Megami was more than likely right that beating of the Gojo clan was a last-ditch wildcard, because that sorcerer was probably dying, and he decided to summon Maharaga as a final, farewell and screw you goodbye. Because nobody has ever tamed Maharaga. Maharaga is the key to him being considered a special grade, because without it, he is, first grade, potentially special first grade. The key aspect of that is that I have to believe that nobody has ever conquered Maharaga using the 10 Shadows technique, even if they unlocked all of the 10 Shadows, and in that case, I don't think he could do it. Unless you could use cursed tools, which might be possible, and if you could use cursed tools, like if he had the inverted spear of heaven, he might have been able to beat Maharaga once, and then he would have had it. But that's a big if, given what Maharaga is, and because of that, and keep in mind the anime makes Maharaga's adaptation way too slow, in the manga it's much, much faster. So you don't have that long length of time for him to try and beat it. And I just don't really see that happening. So while I think Yuji and Megami both got the compliment of being like, you could be on Gojo's level, no, they really couldn't. And while I do think they are powerful, they are the front runners of, the more powerful sorcerers in the series. Within reason, they couldn't do that. So if it comes down to replacing Gojo, Yuta and Hakari are going to be the most